Imagine what it would be like if you were the people of Israel and you were marching around Jericho and you knew that these people were in a walled city. But here's the thing that happened in that story. In that story, Joshua, he put himself on the Lord's side. And the Lord fought the battle with Joshua because it wasn't Joshua's battle, it was the Lord's battle. And then when he fought with Joshua, Joshua got the victory because he positioned himself beside the victor, who is the Lord. But sometimes as Christians, we need to really challenge ourselves, and even more so than challenge ourselves, we need to challenge other people. Is because sometimes people are not on God's side. And because they're not on God's side, they don't get the results in life that they would desire, or even to take it further, they don't get the results in life that God would desire for them. Because all my life, I've always sat down and thought to myself, what was Joshua thinking when he was at Jericho? But I've never thought to myself, what were the people in Jericho thinking when Joshua surrounded them? Could you imagine if you lived in Jericho and in your little heart, you believe that there's a God out there somewhere? You don't know his name, you don't understand him, but you believe that in your heart there really is a God. You have a little image, that you pray to and that you sing to and things like that. And now you look around you and you see all these people that are getting ready to tear apart your city. And the question you ask yourself when you look at your little God is, you say, don't you love me? Are you not real? Are you for me or are you against me? And the problem is because they were worshiping a lifeless God, or they were worshiping a God of their own creation. When the true God showed up, the only way they could see the true God and their God is that both of them have to be evil. Some of our struggle with who God is because we never trusted in him. Some of our struggle with who God is because we were not on his side. Because if we were on his side, we would begin to ask different questions. Everybody asks, are you for me or you're against me? In fact, if you're not careful, even in your friendship sometimes, depending on what kind of friendship you have, sometimes you wonder if some of your friends are really for you. Until you understand that friendship is not about if they're for you. Friendship is really about are you for them? And in our culture, we live in a culture that's self-focused. And when you're self-focused, it's hard to see God's goodness. Because God is not focused just on me, or focused just on you, or focused just on our own personal circumstances. God is focused on his purpose. And there are some times where his purpose is in opposition to my own personal desires, sometimes even to my own personal safety. Do you know that there are some people that are out there that God wants to save, that can't stand you and I, that hate us? And sometimes God's going to use us to reach those people. But I get back to the people of Jericho. The people of Jericho, in their mind, when their city was falling apart, they probably believed 100% that they believed in God. They probably believed 100% that it was wrong for the people of Israel to take over their land. But at the end of the day, the one thing that they were missing was they were not on God's side. To have a conqueror come into your life, not every time you've been conquered by the people of God. Not every time you've been conquered by good people. Because the devil will conquer you too. But every time you've been truly conquered, it was because you weren't on the Lord's side. Because here's the thing, you can imprison me. You can enslave me. You can even mistreat me. But you can never have victory over me when I'm on the Lord's side. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. All of these men or young boys were put in slavery to one of the worst slave owners in the history of mankind. But because they were on the Lord's side, even though he had victory over their nation and it seemed like he had victory over their religion, he didn't have victory over them because they had a relationship with God and they understood that even if my city is taken over, I still serve a good God. I still serve a God of love. I still serve a God who cares for me. So in conclusion, the number one thing that we need to develop in order to develop the right concept of who God is and God's goodness, we have to develop a heart of trust. And the way that I trust God is I begin to count my many blessings and I value them. See, you can count your blessings and not value them. But when you value your blessings, it's so different because there are some things that God has done for you that other people will look down on. Other people will laugh at and say it's foolishness. But then on the other hand, there are some things that they may be blessed in. And when you look at it, it doesn't seem like anything that big. But at the end of the day, we shouldn't count our blessings based upon those outside of us, what they think. We should count our blessings based upon what God is doing. For myself, I count my blessing when I can breathe in and when I can breathe out. And there's some people that will say, what kind of foolishness is that? You can all breathe in, you can all breathe out. Nothing to count your blessing for. Evil people can breathe in, evil people can breathe out. But what I've discovered is I recognize that there are some people who are standing there healthy and all of a sudden they lose their capacity to breathe. And when they get into that situation, they're in trouble. So the fact that God has allowed me to live all these years and not be in that situation, I give him thanks. There are other things I might count a blessing that another person will look at it and say, what kind of foolishness is that? I went to university. Not everybody went to university. But because I went to university, I thank God that I went to university. There are things I learned at university that I would have not learned anywhere else. I thank God for that. A person who didn't go to university will say to me, that's foolishness. It's not necessary. God doesn't care about your head. And that is your truth. But for me, I thank God that he allowed me to go to university because it transformed my life. So I give him thanks for it. But watch this now. My friend never went to university, never went to any kind of school outside of high school. And he thanks God for his situation. Because if he didn't go through what he went through, he wouldn't have become the person that he is. I don't look down upon him because he didn't go to university. And hopefully he doesn't look down on me because I went to university. We all thank God for what God has done in our life. So instead of being angry that you didn't get an opportunity, you should be thankful for the opportunity that God has given to you. Because some people have never received that opportunity. Some of us who are here, we've gotten to preach. Maybe once or twice or a couple times in our life, right? And for us, it's not a big deal. But there's somebody else who's someplace who's never gotten to preach. And they feel a call of God on them. They feel the ability in them. And they've gone 20, 30 years, sometimes 40 years, never been able to live out that calling. They're frustrated and angry. And those of us who have had that opportunity, we should give God thanks. But those of us who have not had the opportunity, we should really look at it and say, is that really what God wanted me to do? And then start to find the things that in my life I can give God thanks for. And if God really does want me to preach, and it's been 30, 40 years, then begin to avail myself and make myself available to say, God, even though it's 30 years, you can use me. Because at the end of the day, understanding God's goodness is not about us coming to a judgment whether he's good. It's us making a decision to be on his side. But when I begin to trust God, when I begin to be on his side, my life will transform. It will transform first because I will begin to think differently. people who I used to look around and see them as my enemy, I realized that they're not my enemy. Because what is about me doesn't matter, because the only thing that's good is God. And I'm not God. So if anybody doesn't like me, they probably have a right not to like me. But I'm not going to worry about if you're my enemy. I'm going to worry about if I'm on God's side. But once I'm on God's side, hopefully, if you have some kind of understanding of good and bad, you'll begin to like me, because you'll see that there's a change. But if you don't like me still, now you don't have to deal with me anymore. You have to deal with God. Same thing for you. If you choose to make God your God and you put yourself on God's side and say, and not trying to get God to be on your side, but you put yourself on God's side. Once you're on God's side and you do things the way that God wants you to do, if people have a problem with you, you don't have to deal with it anymore, because you're on God's side. So now this is God's problem. So I just close in just saying that we need to trust in the Lord. This is not an easy process, because if you're honest, depending on the things that happen in your life, sometimes you say, God, reform me. But you have to re-ask that question and say, God, am I for you?